Evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order this joint work session of the Council for the Borough of Gettysburg, as well as the Gettysburg Stormwater Authority. As many people may be aware, some months ago, Council decided that the impending and likely failures along Stevens Run constitute a burden on taxpayers and homeowners that live near the walls, and so we have decided to begin discussions to see whether it is feasible to take ownership and responsibility for those walls. Joining us here tonight is our friends from the Gettysburg Stormwater Authority. I just want to take a moment and introduce everybody. We have Pat Noggle here. We've got Kurt Kramer. We've got Adam Boyer, their solicitor. We've got Mike Malowicki, and we've got Charles Strauss joining us. And then we do have a quorum of council present as well. Our first order of business this evening is going to be public comment. I don't see any members of the public, so I'm going to assume there is no public comment this evening. And we'll move right into our presentations and discussion. So I'm going to hand this over now to Chairman Malowicki.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moon. Well, let me start off by saying the Stormwater Authority is back again in front of you. We're back, and I'm going to ask Charles to look at the presentation there and go to the second page, and I just want to go through a few things rather quickly. The Stormwater Authority's role is really we're the arm of the Borough of Gettysburg. And as we like to say, the Stormwater Authority does not own anything. And our solicitor would say, nor do we ever want to own anything.
We don't own and we don't want to own.
That's right. And really this comes down ultimately to the Borough of Gettysburg, and that's why we're here this evening. Our job is also to meet state and federal requirements, and I would say our overall aim for the Gettysburg Stormwater Authority is to preserve and protect clean water for our community, and also for the communities below us in Maryland, Chesapeake, and so forth. So we assist the borough with compliance and other things. I just want to remind everybody of that. Charles, if you could go to the very first page, the cover page. We're looking at this tonight and trying to kind of chunk it. And I'm looking, the first chunk is the flood mitigation and duty to maintain flow, funding, and grant opportunities is one chunk. And the other chunk is easements and ownerships, access and maintenance. Or another way to look at it, why we're doing this, the first chunk, and then the second chunk is how. And we'll be hearing from our engineer, Chad, about that in a little while. But Stevens Run has historically been a wonderful part of Gettysburg. At one time, it was actually a trout stream, but I'm talking about like 1870. From, I would say, the late or early 1900s, it then became a stormwater channel as Gettysburg grew north of town. And it's been a stormwater channel since then. As Gettysburg grew, Stevens sort of lost its, what you would call, bucolic stream effect, and is more of a rural stormwater channel. Over time, Stevens Run has taken on the, let me back up. Not Stevens Run, but the owners around Stevens Run have taken the responsibility to protect their property in many different ways. If you look back, it was up to the homeowner to put up walls way back when. And there's a lot of evidence of that in the borough minutes. Those walls were paid for by the homeowner. Over time, that changed, especially in the late 1940s, early 50s. The borough became involved in the walls at Stevens Run. To the extent that they used, and John Lawver's not here, but as John would say, they used grant money at times to fix the walls. However, we're in a period now, the second chunk, or the bottom of the first chunk, we're finding that we cannot adequately address all the problems in Stevens Run without state or federal grant money. And I say this because we're talking to fix Stevens Run, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next few minutes. We're talking about a $10 million project at least. And part of that has to do with the fact that in order to get grant money, we found out, we have to have, now I'll use the word ownership in quotes, but easements and other legal devices to convince grantors that we have responsibility, and we is actually the borough, have responsibility for those walls. Okay? So that being said, I'm looking at over here at Chad, and even before we do that, does anybody have any questions about that? Chad, please go ahead and proceed as you go through the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. So I'm going to try to be pretty quick with some of these slides here, because a lot of this presentation is stuff that you guys have seen already. Earlier this, almost a year ago, I guess early last year, I presented a lot of the same stuff. So I'm going to try to get through it pretty quickly. Feel free to stop me if I'm going too fast and you want to talk about one specific item a little bit more. I'm going to be very careful about my use of the word ownership, right? So we might kind of teed that up there a little bit. There are some walls where I think the borough does kind of have ownership, like where there is a right-of-way over an alley. We talk about Bream Alley all the time. But a lot of these places, we aren't going to be talking about ownership. We're going to be talking about rights-of-ways or easements. When we try to apply for grants, like Mike said, and we just had to do this, Harry and I had to just do this for our C2P2 grant that we're using currently actively on North Washington Street. We had to have a certificate of title. So the grantors want to give the money to a public entity. They don't necessarily want to give this public money to private properties. So we had to have some type of a right to the property. We're going to get into that a little bit. And that's the main goal of this project, isn't to revisit the science, the engineering. It's to kind of get to that point of talking about easements. So I'm going to try to go pretty quickly here. So Mike mentioned that slide a little bit. Mike did mention here already the history of Stevens Run. Of course, this is where we are in the center of the borough right here. The Stevens Run kind of goes around the north and west side of the borough. Little picture of Thaddeus here. We think that the year after Thaddeus passed away is whenever the name changed. That's the best that we could tell from the Tiber to Stevens Run. I could never find anything that pointed back to the Tiber. I tried to do the research. I don't really know where that came from.
No, it was Getty's Run.
Oh, it was Getty's Run before Stevens Run.
Yeah.
Right. So we often refer to it as a Tiber, but again, I don't know where that came from. So from now on, we're going to use the word Stevens Run for now. Until we rename it the Thad and Chad. I was kind of thinking that might be a cool name sometime. Sorry, a little levity.
Which Chad?
Well, we can share Chad. So Mike mentioned the total funding for this project we're thinking is in the $5 to $10 million range. That's a big range. It's still really early in the process. Just to give you an example, the Bream Alley wall that we're currently working on is about $500,000, and that's just for that one little section along the alley. So it adds up pretty quick. Obviously, something that property owners themselves can't really take on themselves. So we talked about some funding opportunities. Mike mentioned some of those. And also I wanted to mention here that the Stormwater Authority staff, Deborah and myself, and I just had a meeting earlier today with my easement person in my office. We're going to start looking into what is required by those grantors. You know, we're looking at DEP, Army Corps, FEMA for the fundors. What kind of easement or ownership or title that will they require in order to be able to apply for their grants? The purpose of this slide isn't to get into the weeds of all of the analysis. I did this presentation a year ago. It's just to kind of reiterate the fact that we started off with this monster of a topic. The first thing we did was that we analyzed the entire Stevens Run, came up with good, fair, and poor segments. Significant amount of it, as you can see there, is in the fair to poor category, and those are the pieces that are really expensive. Some of the things that we looked at, inspection factors, bulging, that's where the middle of the wall is bulging out. Rotation is where the top of the wall is leaning out further than the bottom of the wall. Undermining, that's where the bottom of the wall, where the water is running, the base flow is running. It's kind of eating away at the mortar joints and causing it to fall out from underneath of itself. There's loose and missing stones in a lot of sections. Bream Alley is a great example of that. There's eroded and failed mortar joints. That just happens over time. And failing countermeasures. There's different parts of the walls that are trying to hold it up that are starting to fail as well. So methods of repair and maintenance. And the next couple of slides, I'm going to get into the kind of the levels of repair and maintenance. The first and easiest one is just clearing vegetation. So you can see in this top left slide, that's a tree growing out of the wall. Obviously, that's not good for the wall. We need to get rid of those things, clear this vegetation. This is a piece of the stream that's going right through the college that we just cleaned out. Now, let me stop on that a little bit, because whenever we talk about easements and rights-of-ways and ownership, we aren't just talking about just to repair or replace these walls. It's also for just getting in to clean them out. Gone is the days that we can just go in there and do that without permits and approvals. We need to have DEP permission to go into that stream and clean it out at any time. We're working on trying to get permanent easements so that it's easier to do that kind of for the whole thing. Rather than every time we want to go in there and clean something out, get a new permit. But we do need to have permits to be able to go in there and clean that, and it is not something that we should expect a property owner to be able to do. It's something that's kind of technical. You need to have engineers involved. It needs a PE seal to apply for these permits. Some more methods of repair and maintenance. Now we're going to get into the next level, a little bit more expensive level. You can do some underpinning, where you can see the void underneath of this wall here. They form it up, pour concrete, underpin it. We talk about repointing. So here's a wall with the new mortar joints repointed. We can put in anchors. This is an anchor that's going through the wall right here in this slide. Those are kind of, we know the building where the ugly mug was. There's a wall that's right beside that. We can save that wall if we put some anchors in it. Trying to replace that wall where it's at right next to that building is going to be really difficult. So if we can get to it soon enough, we can save it by adding some anchors. Talked about eliminating vegetation. So now we're going to get into the third level of repair and maintenance, which is kind of the most expensive, is where we just replace the walls. Where we've been using these gravity wall systems. They're these huge 2,000-pound blocks that the weight of the blocks themselves hold them in place. The goal here is that they don't need tiebacks. And so you can save a lot of horizontal distances, and we don't have a whole lot of horizontal distance in most of these projects. So we need to use something like this, but this is what we've done in a couple places in the borough. In fact, I believe this one right here this is Fourscore Church right here. So this is the Susan Noggle Bridge right here. And this one right here is Coon Alley. This is the piece that just fell in a couple of years ago. Whenever I say that these walls are imminently falling in, this is exactly what I mean. This wall literally fell in. This is the borough's trucks back in the background here trying to put it back together. We had to react to an emergency rather than being proactive. And then finally, there are some areas where we add walls that weren't walls once upon a time. Again, this is the Blue Bridge with Foursquare Church. We added walls here that didn't exist. There's some other places on Wolf Alley, but we had talked about it. Water Street to 4th Street. This is over by Victor. There's an area that could use some walls. So there are some areas where we might want to add some walls. That's not a top priority here, by the way. That's back burner type of a thing. So the channel wall inventory, I passed out a document. We kind of try to keep this. We haven't talked to the property owners yet. So let me emphasize that. And we aren't going to try, I'm going to try not to use property owners' names as we go through this presentation. I gave you a list of all of the walls. You have at your place there. That was the first thing that we needed to do is wrap our arms around exactly how many walls are we talking about? Where are these things? Who owns these things? So did the best we could to identify that using that list. It's using county parcel mapping. So that's another disclaimer here. This is just my recommendations that I'm providing on that list. This has not been vetted by the council, the Stormwater Authority, and it's using county parcel mapping. So county parcel mapping isn't perfect. It's a good planning tool. It gives us a good snapshot of where everything is, but certainly all of these things need additional research and additional survey. So at this point, the synopsis is that we have about 43 properties. I kind of broke them into two different categories. This first category is the 15 that we don't really need put any more additional effort into them at this time. For instance, we already know that we own the walls at Foursquare Gospel Church, and we are doing Bream Alley this summer. So we obviously don't need to put any more time into that. I just showed you the pictures. We replaced Coon Alley not too long ago. That's our wall. There are also sections. This is kind of an important piece right here. There's 11 sections of walls that I'm recommending, and again, this is the engineer's recommendation, that we don't need to pursue at this time. And those are where there's a private structure directly built into the wall. And I'll show you a slide here, a couple slides where I'm going to kind of give you some details on the specifics of that. But the good news with those structures, or those sections of the wall, is that the structures are in really good shape. So they're not that imminent failure that I'm concerned about. So we're kind of putting them on the back burner. That leaves the 28 at the bottom here of the ones that I think we do need to put additional effort into. And I wanted to mention that out of those 28, there's 7 of them there that I'm not really sure if I would recommend that we have an easement for it, or if I recommend we don't. It's kind of like there's some of them that are very clearly this is part of a private structure, and there's some that's clearly not part of a private structure. There's some that are kind of in between, and I'm not really sure that's the 7 that I'm suggesting require borough input, because I don't feel comfortable making that decision on my own. So again, the 15 that don't need easements or ownership, I mentioned, again, the Foursquare Church wall. Clearly this piece of the culvert right here is Creekside Apartments. This is Colonial Apartments that are owned by the college. There's, believe it or not, a channel that goes under there. I don't believe that would be the borough's interest. There's a storage building right here that clearly this wall is part of that building. Those are the kind of things that I'm suggesting that we don't need to put a lot of time into. These are the ones that I'm suggesting that we do start looking into. These are the parts of the walls, like for instance, this one right here. This is behind on the north side of Water Street, where the wall is rotating past its center of gravity, and our engineers are concerned about imminent failure. Just trying to give you some ideas of what these walls look like, and kind of describe the fact that these walls don't have a whole lot of space between the wall and the building. You know, and again, there's not a whole lot of space here between this wall and this building, although this is just a shed here. Some more examples that we need to do some more evaluation. This piece right here is the one I just mentioned, where the ugly mug used to be, that I feel like we can save that. As you can imagine, trying to replace that wall would be very difficult. So if we underpin that wall with that tie-back anchors, it would be really who of us. This is a piece right here that I feel like this is the old late night bites here. This is the piece that I'm one of the ones that I'm most concerned about. That would be a priority. So easements versus ownership, right? So I was really careful about using the word ownership. This is just a picture of an easement that we just obtained for our Bream Alley wall. We first survey it, we find the property corners, we talk to property owners, and we get an easement. And there's 2 parts to an easement. There's the easement exhibit that I have a little picture of here, and then there is the written agreement. between the two property owners, and they spell out all the specifics. Again, the question moving forward is, should we start to pursue obtaining those easements? And part of that question needs to go to these grantors. What kind of easement do we need to have? So I wanted to pause there then and see if the solicitor, Adam or Harry, have any input on ownership or easements, those kind of things.
I'm just going to give a little review, if you would, on the legal issues. The Gettysburg Borough Stormwater Authority is charged with the management, maintenance of flow, and the reasonable control of stormwater within the borough of Gettysburg for the overall health, safety, and welfare of the residents of Gettysburg Borough. So when we talk about the duty of the Stormwater Authority, although you don't own facilities, you do have a very important duty, and that is why you were created in 2018. Gettysburg Stormwater Authority was incorporated by the Borough Council as a municipal authority for the purposes of undertaking the duty of management, maintenance of flow, and reasonable control of stormwater within the borough. Like to suggest that this project would come under those duties, if you will. So even though, obviously, because we'll be talking about ownership of facilities, et cetera, and that's going to be the borough that owns the facilities, this is really a joint project, if you will. The authority with the borough essentially providing the financial support and backup, if you will. Stevens Run, as has been noted, is an important component of the management, maintenance of flow, and control of stormwater within the borough. Accordingly, the purpose of the proposed Stevens Run Channel Walls project would be for the management, maintenance of flow, and control of stormwater and potential flood mitigation within the borough, so that it fits within the purposes, candidly, of the authority. Despite its stormwater management duties, Gettysburg Stormwater Authority, as created as a managing and operating authority of the borough, of our stormwater management and conveyance facilities. Accordingly, the borough itself is the owner of the stormwater facilities and the holder of the stormwater easements and rights-of-way. We have our stormwater management program didn't start with the inception of the authority. We have stormwater easements that date back well over 100 years, and there may actually be some far more practical easements that aren't documented by agreement or survey, and I suspect, of course, a number of those are along Stevens Run. What is an easement? It's simply put, it's a right of use of the property owned by another. And it's traditionally, it was limited to certain permitted kinds of uses, with the most important being rights-of-way and rights concerning the flow of water. I would note, and Chad has already noted, of course, we're talking about, and the image up on our screens reflect the Bream Alley project. And I would note that we've already prepared documents for that. In March of 2024, documents were prepared and used for the acquisition from adjoining property owners of the legal rights necessary to complete the limited Stevens Run project along Bream Alley and to maintain and repair the easement areas and facilities in perpetuity. Generally, it's at least my recommendation that we look to kind of in how we approach it, that there would be essentially two separate legal agreements that would be entered into. And again, the borough is would be the holder of those easements. First, there would be temporary construction easements and rights-of-way agreements. And that would be for property access and the completion of the work of the project. In so doing, adjacent property owners would execute temporary construction easements and rights-of-way agreements. The adjoining property owners would grant and convey to the borough a temporary construction easement and right-of-way on, in, and across their respective properties for the purposes of construction, repair, maintenance of the channel walls, the stormwater drainage components, and facilities comprising the project. The second component would be a permanent stormwater easement and right-of-way agreement. And when I say permanent, I mean in perpetuity. If we take that on, we're taking it on in perpetuity. There's no end point, hopefully. The adjoining property owners would, in this circumstance, grant and convey to the borough permanent stormwater easements and rights-of-way on, in, and across their respective properties for the purposes of installation, operation, inspection, maintenance, repair, and replacement of the concrete channel walls, the Stevens Run channel, the stormwater drainage components and facilities comprising the project. Such facilities would be owned by the borough. So now, under this model, the ownership of the real property will remain with the adjoining property owners, subject to the easement rights that are conveyed and held by the borough, or conveyed to and held by the borough. The ownership of the stormwater facilities constructed will be vested in the borough, and it would be by virtue of the permanent stormwater easement and right-of-way agreements. So we will, it would be pursuant to that agreement, because remember, it lasts or it continues in perpetuity. You can have the ownership of facilities in that fashion. Simply put, just think of GMA. GMA's sewer and water facilities cross private property everywhere. And, but GMA still is the owner of those facilities. Those facilities do not become the responsibility of the property owners to maintain, at least from the main or to the main. Obviously, the laterals would be a property owner expense and duty. I will talk about, because really, if you're talking about ownership of property, there's one way basically for the borough to do that, and that would be through eminent domain and condemnation. And I wrote, not recommended. In such a manner, the borough would take the ownership rights of properties from the adjoining owners under that model by eminent domain condemnation proceedings, which would be filed in the County Court of Common Pleas by the borough. So the borough would initiate suits against the property owners. The issues of the litigation would not only be whether or not the taking of the property was for a proper public purpose, but also it'd be a determination of the amount of just compensation to be paid by the borough to a property owner for the taking of his or her property. So those would be the subjects of the lawsuit, but it's a real litigation. Concerns about eminent domain, of course, you're taking your citizens' property. It's expensive. Not only does the borough make just compensation payments and pay its own court costs, but the borough must also reimburse the property owners for a portion of their legal fees and their appraisal costs. The borough would also have to engage an appraiser to determine its opinion as to what would be the amount of just compensation to be paid. There would be also, of course, there would be surveys involved, et cetera. There would be some overlap, if you will, but all of that would need to be completed in terms of an eminent domain action. I don't think I need to tell anybody that the wheels of justice can be a little slow. So you would actually, that would be a litigation, each would be a separate litigation against each property owner, and they wouldn't all necessarily move in tandem. And you could be in a position where a property owner would fight that. And that would, of course, take a lot of time. My other concerns would be, and that's why I've coached to be really cautious about this term of ownership, because I believe the borough's liability would be expanded beyond that with what you're thinking about with ownership, and it would be it would be beyond Stevens Run and the repair of the channel walls and the stormwater management facilities. I would be really concerned that we would be taking on responsibilities for property subsidence. Of course, Chad, I believe that's why you've recommended certain properties we aren't going to. But also the responsibility for resulting damage to property and buildings or personal injury. So we would have to be, I think we need to be really cautious about that. Ownership of property can also be ownership of duties, certain duties that I don't think you wish to undertake and should not undertake for the borough residents in perpetuity in that respect. Now let me say, while hopefully most, if not all, property owners will cooperate with the entry into easement agreements, eminent domain can be used as a tool to procure the necessary easement rights for a project if those easement agreements cannot be negotiated with the property owners. I understand we aren't going to mention what Mr. Lawver said, but I understand Mr. Lawver has an opinion on whether or not people should cooperate
Yes, he
with
does.
this
Yes, he does.
with this project. So, anyway, that's my thumbnail sketch, if you will. Adam, I don't know if you wish to add anything, detract.
No, I would never detract here. So just to kind of pick up briefly where Harry left off, I mean, as he indicated, and as Mike indicated, it's pretty clear to me that the authority right now does not own anything. Number one, it's too new. And number two, nothing's ever been conveyed to it. Any rights that the borough has, nothing's been assigned. Nobody, to my knowledge, has ever deeded anything over to the authority. I think the question for the borough is, you know, if you want to take this on, and that's an if, that's a policy decision that you all have to make, are you prepared to get the bad with the good of it? I mean, there's obviously costs associated with it, but to the extent that there's an ongoing or permanent obligation to do something, are you okay with going down that road? Right now, it's somewhat of a gray area, as Chad indicated. You know, who built these walls, when, why, and on whose property is not necessarily uniform or clear, but to the extent that you're expanding your role in it, is that something that you want to do? The authority does not necessarily have the resources to do that, short of dramatically upping people's stormwater fees, which may or may not happen regardless of the outcome of this. But to the extent this project's going to be pursued, I think it's pretty evident that the borough has a significant role to play. And that's a decision that the council has to make.
So let me just conclude with a few remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Matt for the deliberation. But first, I failed to mention that whenever I was mentioning it, we're only talking about Stevens Run. There's a lot of other places in the borough where there is storm facilities that go through and under private properties. We can have those conversations at a separate time. Culp's Run, we talk about that. Weinbrenner Run, there's all kinds of those places. The Stevens Run is more of a concern to me because that's where you can have a significant impact in flooding if the walls fall in. That's why we're focusing on that for now. Speaking of focus too, and I'm just going to jump to the last slide here for the deliberation, but if you would look at the sheet that I handed out, and if you look at under should number 1, under should 19 and 20, and under questionable number 5. So I'll repeat, should 1, 19 and 20, and under questionable number 5. Those are
And I would add, Chad, you've mentioned number 4.
under question. Oh, yes, under question. Yes, under
So it's
questionable,
4
yes.
and 5,
Yeah, 4 and
really.
5 kind of go together.
Right,
Yep.
right.
So those would be the areas that I would say that are in the most need of our attention. So I think Adam clearly spelled out the question that you guys have to wrestle with. And it's such a big topic, a big project here, that it's going to be hard to come up with just a one-size-fits-all answer. So what I'm kind of helping you with is, do you want, if you were going to do this, I would start with those four, kind of take a bite-sized piece, and then we can start going from there. Those are the areas where that imminent failure, where Coon Alley just failed. That's why I say it's imminent. You know, it's not just my recommendation; it just really happened. So those are the kind of the areas where I would focus our attention on. One other thing with the sheet before I pass it on is, you might see this on the far right column is an ADM Aqua. The properties that have that ownership designation on the county parcel mapping. And just to be clear, that's just a county parcel mapping. Sometimes you have a property that comes up to the stream on this way, a property comes up to the stream in this way, and they don't touch each other. So a county planner assigned that acronym ADM Aqua to that space in between. We don't know who owns that. Right.
But
So
I would be fairly certain that the county's not claiming it as the county's
Exactly.
aqua. if you
Right.
will,
Exactly.
the county's
Exactly.
water. Well, I'm pretty sure it's the borough issue, so maybe the county aqua. But,
Exactly.
and that's just a designation.
So that's all for me. Unless you guys have any questions for me, I'll turn it over to Mr. Moon to lead the deliberation.
All right, thank you, everybody. So there's a lot to consider here, and clearly the most onerous thing to consider is the cost. We can look at this on a micro scale, and we can also look at it on a macro scale, and no matter how we piece it out, cost is an issue. Cost is an issue whether a homeowner is dealing with these collapses by themselves or whether the borough is dealing with them en masse. Charles, could you do me a favor? Could you bring up the third slide, please? Oh, yeah. Maybe Chad could do it. There you go. So it's a little hard to make out on the screen, but if you have this up on your computers, this little map here of Stevens Run has some color-coded areas along it: green, blue, red, etc. And if I'm not mistaken, what this is showing us is sections of the floodplain. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's accurate. The latest FEMA study added the areas that are in red and removed the areas that are in green, but they're basically describing the flooded areas. So the floodwaters do not stay within the wall is the bottom line. Sometimes the flood does overtop the walls.
Yeah. And so those color codes represent severity, you know, a 10-year flood, a 50-year flood, a centennial flood, you know, a once-in-a-100-year sort of event. You can look down this list of properties here, and maybe you're familiar with some of them. Maybe there's others you want to take a walk or drive by and kind of try to get a sense of them over the next few months as we continue this discussion. But I can think of a couple where, should that wall collapse, the cost to the homeowner might actually exceed the value of the parcel. And that's a tough pill to swallow if you're a homeowner, right? If you all of a sudden are met with a catastrophic failure of the borough's infrastructure, and that's your responsibility to fix, and it is the repair is worth more than your entire real assessed value, you're going to be in a protracted debate with your insurance company as to how to handle that. And I think what's probably not going to happen in the short term, in the borough's interest, would be the insurance company paying for that repair. You might get there eventually, but it's not going to happen, you know, next week. It's not going to happen even in a month or 6 months. And so if we have a significant section of wall collapse that is creating even more impediments to proper drainage, this one property owner's concern now becomes everybody's concern, because none of us have proper drainage for what is essentially one of the 2 or 3 main avenues we have for moving large quantities of water around the borough. We have a couple natural streams and a couple channels like this. When the wall collapsed on Coon Alley, that was about 6 years ago, a little more than 6 years ago, I think. It was a catastrophic failure, and it shut down an alley that was directly adjacent to the collapse. It shut down water flow there. It endangered some buildings. And that repair had to be effected, I believe, at the expense of the borough. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that we can probably understand that when we have to fix something in an emergency right away, it's going to be less cost effective than if we are proactive in addressing failures before they are catastrophic. The work of lining up grant money and approaching these in a systematic and informed manner, we may not get ahead of every catastrophic failure, but we can probably get ahead of some of the worst ones that are going to impact the highest number of citizens and taxpayers. So we do have a fairly substantial cost ahead of us, and every day or week we wait, the cost of those construction materials just continues to balloon. This is not a project that's going to get cheaper over time unless we get somebody else to pay for it. But the cost of doing it is going to continue to grow over time, just as we saw with the Baltimore Street Connectivity Project. The longer we wait, the bigger the grants we're trying to find are going to get. So at this point, I'd like to open up deliberation to council members, and I would remind you all that we have some very intelligent and dedicated citizens here who work on these stormwater issues for us in a volunteer capacity. And so if you have questions, we have resources in the room that can help answer them. But the primary question before us is still, I think, does council believe that the best thing for the borough and for the, hundreds of people who live along Stevens Run is the best thing still that we take ownership of that infrastructure, or responsibility, I should say, instead of ownership, and actively start to repair systems that have been ignored for the better part of a century? Or do we just wait and let things fail and let homeowners sort this out for themselves? So I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on how you think we should proceed. And if you have questions, feel free to have just a general discussion here.
I'll start. I do believe that it should be the borough's responsibility. At the end of the day, it is going to be the borough's responsibility if it's an emergency that we have to deal with, like we've already dealt with, or if it is happens to a homeowner that obviously cannot afford such an expense. It's going to cause damage to other parts of the borough, not just that specific property.
Yep. Anybody else?
Are we?
Kurt, go ahead.
Well, just to ratify that point, when a wall does fail or there's a collapse, the property owner, whether they know they own the wall or not, they expect the borough to come in and fix it. And we've had this discussion at the Stormwater Authority that we need to fix it because if there's an impediment and water backs up, it puts other properties at risk. So one way or another, the borough's got to get involved.
That's right. Mike, do you think that the authority in general has a consensus opinion as to whether ownership would be appropriate or stewardship would be appropriate, I should say?
Yeah, I like the word responsibility more than ownership. Both solicitors have weighed in on that term, and I think they're right. I think the borough does have a responsibility. It has a history of having a responsibility. I think Kurt's right. Some homeowners would be shocked to know that they're responsible. And we have, I'm kind of cutting to the chase here for something. Last meeting, we talked, I think, in detail about how to leverage what we have as a short-term issue and then the long-term issue of the entire Stevens Run. The short-term issue are those 4 or 5 properties. There are grants out there, small grants, $500,000 grants, right? $1 million grants that we were kicking around saying maybe the model should be to start to look at those 4 or 5 properties, go to those homeowners and seek those easements and say, you need help, we need an easement, and explain what the process would be. And once we had an easement, now we have to make sure that an easement is enough for these grantors. And if it is, then we would apply for what we think are funds, and I've said this before, that we are eligible for, that we should get. In the past, we haven't always gotten them. However, I think our argument would be much stronger now. So, as I said, cutting to the chase, kind of chunking it out, trying a model for 4 or 5 properties that need emergency help, at least I would call it. Engineer may not. And as we work on the larger picture and the borough moving through its various channels to come to a conclusion of responsibility.
I do have a question on that. It makes sense to me as well to go through it kind of systematically, taking those bite-sized pieces, unless, and maybe Chad, you'll know this, if you went to a contractor and said, look, instead of giving you 1 or 2 of these, if we gave you the whole thing,
Right.
would you give us a better price on it? I don't know if they work like that or not.
Well, I think that's right. It's the economies of scale issue, and we would certainly be interested, especially if we had a small chunk of 4 or 5 that said, yes, we'll do this. We would look at those economies with whatever contractor's qualified to do that.
Yeah,
But you're right.
100%. I think that's completely accurate. And I pointed out those 4 specific properties, but the neighboring 2 properties probably go with it. In some cases, there's only 1 property we're talking about. But if there's neighboring 2 properties, you would want to do a chunk. So sometimes it's because of the economy of scale. That's the proper term. A contractor can do more bang for the buck in terms of, I guess, figure of speech. But also it's logistics. So sometimes you have a section of wall that doesn't have like a really good terminus, like a bridge, where you just want to replace that entire wall at the same time. You wouldn't want to piecemeal it, per se.
Thank you.
I have a
The other outlier, is I think there's some wisdom in Mr. Malawicki's perspective here, and just start with the 4 that were in imminent failure, a risk of failure, because we don't even know really at this point how much it's going to cost to go through the legal hoops, if you will, to obtain the rights of way. If we do the 4, that's a much more financially manageable chunk of money than the entire length of Stevens Run. So at least dealing with the 4 that are in imminent risk will give us a way to budget moving forward for the complete project. That's within, I think, the stormwater's capacity to absorb those legal fees now, and then obviously we would extrapolate that out to obtaining the easements through the entire length and then construction dollars as well.
Madam Mayor?
Somewhere I heard somebody say Chesapeake Bay. This is part of the Chesapeake Bay project. Is there any funding from the state or federal government that would be possible for this?
Yes, there are, whether it's through the Chesapeake Bay I'll say foundation and
Yeah.
various other organizations, but there's funding through groups like the Army Corps of Engineers that technically has nothing to do with the Chesapeake Bay, although it does, and the state has money as well. And these are some smaller grants of $500,000 to $1 million. Chad, do you have any?
Yeah, I
Insight on
think you touched on a few of them. There is Chesapeake Bay grant. We've received monies from that source before. There's FEMA. There's Army Corps.
Right,
There's
FEMA.
the flood mitigation through DEP. That's in lieu of the small H2O grant. That's a $500,000 or less grant. But I think one of the general point is, yes, there are potential sources, and our partners in Coase and O'Connor, public strategists that we've been meeting with, have been trying to help us identify and talk to the folks that could help us with those funding.
Right, and one of the interesting things about Stevens Run is that it originates on the Park Service. It originates roughly at Pickett's Charge or near the Kadori House. So we've even talked about how that might help us in our grant writing. And I can tell you a lot of water comes off of the battlefield onto Stevens Run, into Stevens Run.
Any other council questions?
Yeah, I would agree. It's the borough's responsibility. I like the idea of starting with those 4 riskiest properties. I guess I'm listening to Attorney Eastman and Boyer too. I guess the question is, would we still have responsibility even if we didn't have the ownership and going that route? Am I right to say you're warning Harry against
Taking
complete?
on too much.
Can you explain then?
I counsel caution.
Yeah.
If, and the reason I do that is it seems fairly apparent that you're gonna need grant funding to take on this project. Would the Borough Council wanna place itself in a position that it would, say, to do a project that's $10 to $15 million, that you didn't get sufficient grant funding, that you're going to raise the taxes of all of the taxpayers of the borough to do that? And again, I think to a degree, it's not our duty. We're not the insurers of property. I don't want to sound unsympathetic. It's catastrophic when a property burns down, but it's not the borough's function to insure those properties. People have insurance to do that. It's not our role or function. What we need to focus in on is what our role is, and that is the stormwater management, flood mitigation, those issues that cut across and are in the overall health, safety, and welfare. So where I want us to be really cautious is that making statements or doing something that would put us in a greater responsibility than what we already have. I think you look at what your duties are, and there's plenty to do within those duties, but I would not want you to take on the role of essentially being the insurer of property, because once you take on that ownership, then you are responsible for injuries that may occur.
Right.
I just counsel caution in that regard. Not saying, it seems very clear that this work needs to be done and for the proper purposes. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I guess, let me ask another question. So I said we should have responsibility, but can we have responsibility without ownership? And does that mean getting easements for the whole way?
Sure, and that's why I recommend easements. Easements, I mean, you still would own the facilities that and you would still be able to maintain the facilities. You'd be able to do everything that Chad indicates. It would be within the breadth of the easement to do that. And of course, it's not a cookie cutter process either. We would be developing an easement agreement that would be very specific to this project. And indeed, very specific to each property. Chad indicated that there's 2 parts to an easement. I think of it as one big whole, if you will, because the easement agreement can't stand without the survey work that's done, the particulars. Yet, I would say that the survey in and of itself needs a binding legal agreement to deal with the various rights that people have and so forth. So,
Well, if there's one takeaway that I would like to put out there for everybody, is that this whole project is about flood mitigation.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. And everything that, I'll use the word, flows from that. But it's flood mitigation, and it's protection of people's property in town as much as we can. I don't think we're going to be able to protect from a 200-year flood, but I think we can take care of as much as we possibly can that the engineers plan and organize for us. So
I just want to say I understand the urging of caution. I do understand why we would want to be careful here, but there's a distinction to be made. You know, this isn't, nobody bought waterfront property when they bought a home along the Stevens Run, right? They bought, maybe 150 years ago they did. Maybe you were building a home along a trout stream. But if you've bought your home anytime in the last 100 years, which I think most of us probably have, what you've bought is a house that is next to a piece of property that is clearly borough infrastructure. It doesn't even take, those 100-year floods to overwhelm our drainage. I remember 3 years ago, was it? Maybe 4 years ago, just 1 o'clock in the afternoon, heavy rain for about 30 minutes, put so much water into that the water was overtopping at the Noggle Family Bridge there. The water came up so fast that it was shooting straight up through the holes in the manhole covers.
Right.
The removal of that water is in everyone's best interest. I don't think there's any reasonable person who would say, well, that's the 112 people who live along its problem. It's not my problem because it's everybody's water when it backs up. All right, so being cognizant of the time, is there a consensus that we need to arrive at tonight, or is this an ongoing discussion? Where do we need
think
to go?
at a minimum it would be, I think staff would like direction from the council to maybe put a motion on your next business agenda to authorize the solicitors and the engineer to engage the 4 property owners and then seek those rights of way, and then we can report back on timelines and costs to do those things.
Right. Are there any council members present that would object to that discussion happening in a public meeting? No. Does anybody think that's not a wise course for us to pursue? Okay. I'm hesitant to try to come to too much of a consensus, missing members. Hopefully they will have an opportunity to review this video before we get to that discussion and deliberation. So it sounds like we have a plan for future deliberation. Before we adjourn, I just wanted to, we have to go back to public comment, but I do want to say thank you to the members of the Stormwater Authority who are here tonight. Again, these folks, with the exception of Mr. Blair, are volunteers.
Hey now.
Adam cares.
No, I don't. These folks are volunteers. These are our neighbors, and thank you all for being here tonight and helping us come to sane and reasonable, rational approaches to this. Did you have anything you wanted to throw in? All right.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Everybody in the Borough Council, thank you.
All right. So that takes us to our second public comment. I did see some public come in. Did you have any comment you wanted to make tonight? Okay. Not seeing any public comment, we will adjourn. We have another meeting starting here in 1 minute, but I'll give you 6. So we'll be back here at 7:35.
What a good guy.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order this special council business meeting for the Borough Council for Monday, February 24th, 2025. If you would all please join me, please stand and join me in a moment of silence and a pledge to the flag. Thank you, everybody. An executive session was conducted by the Borough Council immediately prior to the adjournment of its monthly general business meeting held on February 10th, 2025, consistent with Section 708A1 and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act. That takes us to our public comment section for the evening. Is there anybody here who wishes to make public comment in this special business meeting? All right, not seeing any, we'll move directly into new business. We have 3 items in front of us tonight. The first one has to do with the discharge of an employee of the police department. The second one has to do with granting construction bids, and the third one has to do with setting another special meeting. So we're a little out of our usual routine here. So we will read the motions. If there's a second, we will move forward with that, and then we are free to discuss before we vote. Would anybody care to make the first motion tonight?
I'll make a motion to honorably discharge employee number BEVEN 005 from employment pursuant to the Borough Code 8 PA CSA 1190 A1 and Chapter 6, Section 6.3 of the Borough of Gettysburg Civil Service Rules and Regulations.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, is there any discussion?
I don't know how much discussion we can have, but I want to make sure that I emphasize this is an honorable discharge of an employee.
Yep.
It's horrible to do any type of thing like this, but in this situation, I'm afraid we have to.
Any other comments or questions? Chief, is there anything you'd like to say here?
No, I don't think so.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Would anybody care to make the second motion?
I'll make a motion to award the base bid only for construction of the North Washington Street sidewalks and streetscape CDBG rebid project to the lowest qualified, responsive, and responsible bidder, Kinsley Construction LLC, at the bid price of $344,268.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Mr. Claybaugh, is there anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I can give you a couple of remarks. So this is kind of an administrative procedure. This follows up on the bid that we did in around November. If you can remember, we only got one bid on this project for curb and sidewalk replacements associated with the Gettysburg Interloop Phase B2 project. We had to rebid because that's a DCED requirement to use CDBG funding. This time we got 3 bids, so we're good to go with that. You have my recommendation to award here. That's a qualified contractor. And the only other thing I wanted to point out is I was careful to recommend in your motion the base bid only. So you might remember I did a presentation back in November suggesting that we don't add the rapid flashing beacons. That was a workshop, so there was never a formal decision made. So essentially, if you go with the motion as it's read tonight, that would be your formal decision to officially remove those rapid flashing beacons. You can see in the bid tabulation the amount of those rapid flashing beacons
plus the electrical work, it was still over the $50,000 number that I was quoting back at the time. One other thing, just a housekeeping, if you could keep these, you all are aware of the bid tabulation. It's industry standard to keep that bid tabulation confidential until there's a contract in place. This is ultimately a public document and it'll be distributed publicly, but for now we keep it confidential until we get a contract in place, just in case we have to rebid it. It protects the integrity of those unit prices. So again, you have my recommendation to award to Kinsley at their base bid amount listed in your motion, and it excludes the alternate of the rapid flashing beacons.
All right. Any questions for Chad before we move on? All right. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. The last motion.
I'll make the motion. A motion to set a public hearing and a special meeting of the Borough Council to be held on Monday, March 24th, 2025, commencing at 6:30 p.m. for the purpose of receiving public comments and recommendations of interested individuals residing within the Borough of Gettysburg concerning an application filed with the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board made by Gateway Mini Mart Use Incorporated, seeking approval of an intermunicipal transfer of a restaurant liquor license for use in the borough at certain premises located at 517 Baltimore Street.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. For the benefit of the members and the public, this one might sound very familiar to you because it is very familiar. It is the same license being transferred to the same real property. However, the name on the application has changed, and per Commonwealth regulation, we must hold the hearing again. Is there any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. That's going to take us to our second public comment section for the evening. I saw some folks come in. If you do have public comment, please use the podium. Please state your name and address of residence. Please limit yourself to 5 minutes. Is there any public comment for this meeting? Seeing none, we are adjourned. We will be back here in 3 minutes. I'd like to call to order this work session for the Borough Council for the Borough of Gettysburg, Monday, February 24th, 2025. I don't have any opening remarks or announcements, but we do have a special presentation from our friends at the Gettysburg Garden Club. If you wouldn't mind using the podium and speaking to the microphone, we'd appreciate that.
Get it down, because I'm short. There we go. All right. Long evening for you guys. Thank you for having us. This April is the 65th anniversary of the Gettysburg Garden Club. I know. And in looking back at our history, I found that the Gettysburg Garden Club has been planting flowers in the middle of the square since 1965. I bet for some of you in this room, you weren't even born yet. And we took over the responsibility of planting the curbside planters and the baskets in 2008. 60 years of partnership with the borough, and for the past 3 years, Pat Thorson and I have had the privilege of working with both Charles and Robbie in keeping our town beautiful. Let me stop a second and introduce you to Pat Thorson. She's sitting right here. She's the chair of our Civic Development Committee, and she is the person we thank for everything that's done on time and done well. She orders all the flowers, organizes the planting and the weeding, the baskets getting hung, works with Robbie to get them all watered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you see her, say thank you. As I was saying, we wish to thank Charles and Robbie for all they do to support the club, with a very special thank you for assuring that we're at the table as the Gateway project rolls out. In spring of 2023, we met with Charles to discuss changes that we wanted to make in the circle. At that time, he made us aware of these discussions around the changes from Baltimore Street down to and including the square, and that those plans were very much at the beginning stages. So we held off because we didn't know what changes would happen or not happen. Now, 18 months later, although still no final plan, and I just heard it's been slowed down again, we do know that the medallion or the circle in the square will not change size. Since that discussion in 2023, conditions in the circle have gotten worse. And at the core, we are gardeners, and we just can't take it any longer. So we need to address the condition of the circle now, or we'll be facing a circle that looks like a weed patch and not a design of pretty flowers. There are two areas that need to be addressed. One is minor and easily fixed. The other is quite major. You may have noticed that the tulips in the square are becoming more and more sparse. Tulips last 4 to 5 years. In 2023 was 4 years, and that was when we were discussing changing them. And then even more so, became even more sparse last year because we held off, waiting to see what was going to happen. I will discuss our plans for bulbs, not tulips, bulbs in just a minute. That's our minor issue. The major issue we need to address is the condition of the soil in the 4 beds. I won't trouble you with a Latin name. I'll tell you what it is, what we call it in the club. We call it Weedzilla. For over more than 10 years, we have been fighting and trying numerous methods to control a weed that is extremely invasive and extremely aggressive. You leave 1/4 of an inch of a root, and it comes back, and it thinks, oh my goodness, I'm dying, so it sends even more up. We've lost the battle. So this year, Weedzilla has gotten so predominant in the soil that it's choking out all the flowers. Working with Robbie and Trevor Redding from Redding Horticulture, we've devised a plan to address this issue. We will be removing all of the soil in all 4 beds. The utility companies have been contacted and will mark all gas, water, and electric lines under the square. Then we are going to come in and dig out every single bed. We're going to dig it down 12 inches. We're going to lay a landscape cloth on the bottom of the bed and up the sides of the bed, and then out across the flat of the soil out 8 inches. We're going to lay it down twice. This is how bad this weed is, so that we'll then have a nice, great big hole. When we dig it out, we will dig out all of the Russian sage, the perennial. The roots of this weed are just all through that, and we will be digging out all of the tulips that are left. Then we're putting back in soil that is good soil, composted, etc., has been screened to get seeds out, etc. And we'll now have nice, good soil in there, and we're going to cover it with mulch so that the beds will then look like flowers with a ring of mulch around them, and that ring will be where the 8 inches comes out to cover. The idea is that the weed can't come up or into the beds. This means that there'll be dump trucks and earth movers on the square, and big dump trucks. So Robbie and his staff will be there to supervise the project and to direct traffic, and we're hoping to have this accomplished this March. When we complete the soil removal, we'll lay mulch, which I've talked about. The summer planting will, let me stop a minute. That means that this spring, there will be pansies in the street corner planters, but no tulips in the circle, none. It will be bare this spring. The circle will remain bare until we do our red, white, and blue flowers in late May, and the hanging of the baskets and the changing of the planters to the summer flowers will also happen as they usually do in May. Next fall, when we remove the annuals and before we lay winter mulch, we will plant daffodils. We're working on a design plan that will bring back spring bulbs in time for our 2026 anniversary celebration. So those are our plans, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about them and hope we have your agreement in how we're going to move forward.
Well, thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions? Does this Weedzilla have a different name, or is that just?
It does. Pat, you know the name of it? I try to not remember.
Field bindweed.
Oh,
And it has a Latin name too.
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the update.
You're welcome.
A lot of us work in the tourist industry. We see people from all over the country and all over the world, and I will tell you that it is a very common thing for people to walk in and compliment the gardening, the plants, the planters,
Yes.
everything that goes on around the
Yes.
square. I hope you know how valued it is. And
When we're in the square weeding, people will honk, roll down their windows, and yell "thank you." It's very nice. And we've had other garden club members in different states come and jaywalk into the middle of the circle and talk to us about the fact that they're a garden club too, and that they loved what we're doing. So yes,
excellent. And I agree. Robbie is a wonderful guy to work with. Thank you for cooperating with him as well. And
wouldn't do it without him.
yeah, thank you for what you folks do to keep the town beautiful and presentable and visitable. And thanks for dealing with this impending weed of
Weedzilla.
doom.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. It's
President
an
Mayor.
honor to work with you. Thank you.
And just for the public, if anyone would like to donate to these beautiful flowers that you see all over Gettysburg, GettysburgGardenClub.org. They are an official 501c3 not-for-profit. Their mailing address is on their website. Every little bit, I guarantee, will help with
Absolutely,
scholarships.
every little bit will help.
And flowers around Gettysburg. Thank you for what you do. It's beautiful.
All right. It takes us to our first public comment section for this meeting. Is there anybody who would wish to speak tonight on items appearing on tonight's agenda?
My kids want to speak, but in the later section, but it's a school night, so I didn't know.
Unfortunately, if it's not on tonight's agenda, we do need to wait, but it's not a terribly long agenda. So, is there anybody else who would wish to speak for public comment tonight? All right, then we will move right into current and old business, and our first thing tonight has to do with us revisiting sidewalk clutter and A-frame signs. Mr. Whitmore.
Oh, actually, I have a presentation. Pull up.
Please hold.
For the 5-hour discussion regarding sidewalk, we'll begin now. As discussed previously, the sidewalk clutter and signage, what we can do immediately is get us into compliance with ADA. So here's the famous graphic. You'll see this is part C. It is the yellowish green sphere that makes up just a portion of the sidewalk entire diaspora. So when talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, this is something that as a local government we have to do. And we are bound by Chapter 4, Section 403 of the 2010 ADA Standards for Accessible Design, which they provide specific requirements for travelways, pathways, ground walking ways. In particular, the design standards. Doesn't seem to want to move. The design standards specifically are made so that they would be physical, human, and competent. I mean, it's actually trying to make sure that people have ways to pass each other. So there are very strict limits about how low you can go with width. 36 inches is the absolute minimum, but when you start having turns in areas where there's congestion, it becomes problematic. Generally, the standard of 60-inch width provides the overall approach to allow for a movement. Once you go below 5 feet, that's when some interesting provisions kick in for passing zones, as shown in the right graphic. The accessible design standards are further classified with passing spaces, as I just discussed. Currently, sidewalk clutter, it's regulated under signage section, that's Chapter 19. So we're allowed to have portable signage within the public right-of-way on sidewalks. However, there is specific language regarding their placement in reference to those 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. Sections 21, 221 through 228, they provide the actual sidewalk provisions related to encroachments into that public right-of-way. They get into, actually, let me go back. They get into things like flower boxes, vending machines, and building features. We're not going to touch building features tonight. That's actually something that's covered more with the subdivision ordinance and the zoning ordinance. But when it comes to flower boxes and vending machines, staff does have some thoughts. And further, we have some thoughts with regards to how this all interplays with merchandise and other items of attraction that business owners will place into the public right-of-way to a pedestrian scale to get people to come into the business. There's nothing wrong with that, but we want to make sure we're complying with ADA. So as such, recommending some modifications in such that currently flower boxes are permitted without any permitting, but there's a provision that allows for them to extend out from 2 feet from the building face. What we're recommending is just ensuring that the minimum 5 foot width is provided. This is just a general recommendation, so it's something that council can stew upon, but overall it would just be reiterating ADA compliance for flower boxes. Staff's recommending we remove the provisions for vending machines as it's not necessarily accounted for in the licensing provisions. It appears to have been something, I guess, from the 80s. There's also provisions as it relates to historic district, although they're not necessarily something that would be covered under the historic district ordinance, as they're not necessarily a portion of a structure. Finally, there's the provisions with merchandise in the public right-of-way. So what staff is asking is to potentially expand the classification of merchandise to include art or other objects, attention-getting devices, and then also ensuring that there's a permitting system that would ensure that, similar to outdoor dining, that there is adequate space that is provided for pedestrians to freely traverse on the sidewalks. All of this is just provided as suggestion at this time. And looking at best practices, it becomes a little challenging as overall we have to comply with the ADA. So sometimes the more permissive ordinance is not in compliance. So this is what we've taken our first crack at it. With these changes, it's nothing that should be too problematic. However, the outdoor commercial use areas, that would be something where we would be having additional language and ordinance related to a new permit class, new license class. pretty much the idea at this time is just to mimic the outdoor dining permit area regulations, as it would limit the placement of any objects in an area that would not allow for the at least 3 feet, but preferably 5-foot travel way. Some instances, businesses will not be able to take advantage of the display of merchandise because it would be non-compliant with the ADA due to the existing built environment. So some businesses do not have adequate pedestrian frontage already. Placing signage makes it challenging. There are other impediments such as street lights, street furniture. All of this comes into play. That's why we're recommending the permitting. It doesn't necessarily need to be something that's too extreme for the applicant, but just something that we can ensure the code compliance. We will even potentially pin the area to establish location design. Business concerns we're already experiencing, though, so I put up a big flag now. Staff has been made aware of concerns specifically regarding the flag provisions in the sign ordinance. As it is now, we require flags to have a minimum of 7 feet from the ground for the fabric. As it relates to the ADA, that's actually a little bit more. The ADA requires protrusions be at least 6 foot 8 inches from the ground. So this would be, it's an additional 4 inches that we're providing with the flag regulation. The complaints we're getting, though, are justified. I mean, many of these individual business owners, they were operating open flags and the like, or American flags and the such. It does become problematic to a certain extent as we are regulating their speech as it relates to commercial activity. I mean, we already have ADA compliance, so we're trying to be in keeping with that with a 7-foot regulation. It's just something to keep in mind. I mean, I'm sure Joe could provide even more detail on it, but it's something that's come up through a few conversations just beyond immediate complaint when someone gets a warning letter. So we want to make sure that council is aware that while these regulations would be beneficial and in keeping with the Americans with Disabilities Act, there would be potential for pushback, so to speak, or complaint from businesses, as it is limiting their ability to advertise. What we're trying to get to is a consensus where we can have modification for the encroachment provisions as they relate to flower box regulations, so getting rid of the vending machine licensing and then examining this concept of outdoor commercial areas to allow for insured permitting and insured placement of items in the public right-of-way to comply with the ADA. Then additionally, we're not trying to change the protrusion for flags at this time, but it's something just to be aware of that we could make it go 4 inches lower and be in compliance with ADA, but any further there would be an issue. So that's all the material I have for this tonight. Like I said, just trying to get general consensus on proceeding with these revisions as discussed.
So I'd like to ask a question. My recollection from when we discussed the sign ordinance, and I know that this, at least in part, predates your time here with us, but my understanding was that the staff's recommendation was to go to 7 feet on the flag height in order to bring us into compliance with existing Commonwealth law. Is that not the case?
It was to bring it into compliance, yes. I would say that I'd have to check to make sure that with regards to Pennsylvania specific law, I'm not aware of the 7-foot requirement, but it was the whole design provision was to make it in compliance with ADA. So it went above and beyond in terms of 4 inches.
Am I crazy here?
I can help you. I do believe PennDOT does have a requirement for their signs to be 7 feet. I think what John's saying is since 7 feet's higher than 6 foot 8 inches, it's still compliant with the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines. You've heard me use that acronym, that PROWAG acronym. That's the Department of Justice's guidelines for ADA accessibility. So to me, that's the document that has the ultimate say. PennDOT's requirements, just adding a little bit more.
All right. So let's just go point by point here and try to get through these so that staff has what they need to move forward. Modifying the flower box regulations. Does anybody have an issue with modifying that so that flower boxes could not exist if they impeded the 5-foot clearance?
No issue.
Can you give me some examples? Without saying names of property owners. If you're
no.
talking about a flower box, I'm sorry?
No. I have to give you a name.
You're talking about a flower box that's on the right of way, adjacent to someone's property?
So,
Is that what we're talking
yeah,
about?
Like
I'm
downtown.
aware. One immediately comes to mind, walking down Baltimore Street towards the square.
Okay.
You'll pass a business that has multiple flower boxes on the sidewalk that are immediately adjacent to their building facade. So what Mr. Whitmore is suggesting is that we would formally adopt a process to ensure that those flower boxes do not impede greater than they already are. Right now, that would be in compliance, is clearly 5 feet from where the flower boxes end to the curb.
Gotcha.
But
Or
so
from
that's
flower
somewhat-
box to any other object.
correct.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Does anybody have a problem with that one? Okay. The removal of vending machine licensing from sidewalks. Anybody have an issue there?
Can I ask a question? to
Yes.
John? Can you give me some history or context of vending machines in the borough? When was it allowed, or when did that kind of fall out of favor? Or?
Well, from the limited research I was able to do, it just appears to have been something that was allowable. It's unique in that the borough manager is permitted to approve the locations and operation of the vending machines. It's not something that we've recommended from a code compliance standpoint, as you're having generally electric going beyond property boundaries, which is in itself a little problematic, but then also that there's liability associated with it. So when we've had questions regarding vending machines, like the cotton candy machine on Steinway is a more recent example, if it's within the property boundary or within the actual structural footprint, then it's something we're not regulating in this manner. So it's very limited. I think it was more of an attempt to have a type of commerce occurring that it just never took off, so to speak.
We don't have a current example of a vending machine on the public right of way, right?
I don't have any.
No, I don't think so. Does anybody have an issue with that being removed?
Do we know how many vending machines are in the borough?
We keep licensing information for the amusement devices, but in terms of the individual machines, no, because they're going to be operating within retail sales establishments, so it's captured with that either land use or the point of sale associated with, I mean, it being in like Kenny's Market or something like that. It's more limited.
This is specifically for things placed on the sidewalks,
Yeah.
right? Right.
So
Well, like
I guess
the
I'm sorry.
newspaper ones, like on the square and stuff.
So those will get into that. That's more of a street furniture. It's not something that is with vending machines per se. This is more. I think we're trying to regulate those with the next one, with the outdoor commercial area.
Now I'm even more confused because I guess I was about to ask, what is your definition of a vending machine? But if a newspaper is literally vending a newspaper, when you put coins in and take it out, is it not a vending machine?
We haven't regulated.
We haven't
under
regulated as that.
under that section.
So my question on top of that is what it still remains. What is the definition of a vending machine? Is it that the point of sale has to happen at the machine, or is it a machine that might be electric that is displaying product that you then have to take inside to buy?
It hasn't come up in an instance where
Right.
this has been something that we've had to define. In terms of the activity, we're trying to make sure we're regulating the encroachment of products and furniture and things into the right of way. So that's what we're trying to limit, is just those devices, period, not where the point of sale is occurring.
I was going to say historically, and I guess I've been here now a while. If I could, there was significant concern on the part of the Borough Council with regards to the proliferation of like the newspaper vending or the free flyers that you could get in those vending boxes. And there were issues with regards to the abandonment of those too, that they were scattered around the borough and then just abandoned and so forth. So I think, I mean, there was a connection with the licensing provision in that to attempt to, if you would, regulate those.
Well, I mean, I can recall probably as recently as 6 or 7 years ago, a previous council was moving to remove, newspaper boxes, the free real estate magazine boxes. There was a proliferation of these around the square, like a dozen or so, and that were never filled, were sort of moldering, were ugly and a nuisance, and that was those were intentionally removed. I mean, if we don't have an instance of in anybody's recent memory of a vending machine having been licensed to be placed on the sidewalk, then I don't think we reasonably have cause to keep it in. If there's no need for it, then there's no need for it. Anybody disagree with that?
I don't disagree. That's, I guess what I'm asking is, how many licenses do we have right now for vending machines, or do we have none? And that's why we're removing it.
Yeah.
This manager has never been asked
To have a
for
vending
permission
machine.
to place a vending machine.
Okay. Well,
Shouldn't we keep it in place until you issue one, Charles, at least get one issued?
Okay. Do we have a consensus there? I feel like we do.
Yeah.
You good?
We're gonna strike that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then continue existing protrusion regulations for flags. So,
wait, did we skip outdoor commercial
did we,
area?
oh, I'm sorry, we did. Examine outdoor commercial area permitting. Can you restate this again for me, John?
This would just be to further refine the licensing requirements. We can provide that to council at the we're getting to March already, work session, just with that specific language. But if that's acceptable to continue to pursue that idea, staff can do such and have some additional ordinance materials next month.
All right, and if I understand you correctly, this isn't to necessarily remove anybody's rights, but it is to ensure passage on the sidewalks where we need at least 5 feet of clearance.
Yes.
Right. Okay, any concerns?
Are we trying to charge them, like for the outdoor seating?
I don't think that would be something that staff's got to suggest. Just to begin the discussion of ensuring that we have sidewalks that are navigable. Clearly, it's your right of way. You can monetize it. If I put on my economic development hat, I mean, you could make money. At the same time, though, we already have complaints coming from business owners regarding just the general ordinance, let alone then charging fees that would be potentially profit-making. That could be a problem.
Yeah.
So we're going to provide an ordinance basis that would be either no cost or low cost, and provide justification for a cost.
I wouldn't be in favor of charging. I think that the way the economy is, it's hard enough for people to, get by with these small businesses.
And ultimately, we're trying to have compliance, and it's a little different than outdoor dining. Outdoor dining, you're creating a unique nuisance in the public right of way. It's not quite the same, and frankly, when you have stuff in the right-of-way, wares, merchandise, art, it provides a better pedestrian experience, so people actually enjoy walking. So we'll provide you with options if it's acceptable.
Anybody have any concerns there? I mean, as a borough that specifically eliminated business licensing, it wouldn't make sense for us to then turn around and start nickel and diming businesses over, I mean, further, you know, outdoor dining contributes to sort of this feel and culture of what the borough is. It's very different from a borough where everything is restricted to indoor activity. I think people love being outside, you know, especially in the nice weather. I wouldn't want to discourage it where it's viable, but we do need to maintain adequate clearances. Everybody okay with staff's direction there? Okay. And now, continue existing protrusion regulations for flags. So again, this is where I'm having a little confusion because I believe your predecessor had advised us that we would be bringing it into concurrence with state regulations, not exceeding them. The 7-foot number was specifically a recommendation of your predecessor.
Well, if I'm understanding Chad correctly, this would allow for compliance on state DOH right-of-ways. So there would be instances where PennDOT is going to require an additional 4-inch clearance. So that must be where the 7 feet directly is coming from. We additionally had conversations in the working group, just initially trying to establish what would be an acceptable height. The concern with flags in general is just that they have a way of interacting directly with people's faces.
Sure do.
So making sure that if someone's like a taller person's able to not have to worry about clearance. That's why 7 feet was picked, because it'll be very challenging to find someone that would have an interaction at that height. Now, if it's something, if we want to make this more in compliance with ADA and go down to 6'8", that would be something staff can do relatively easily and provide ordinance as such.
All right. Feelings?
What is the pushback you're getting?
So we recently, code enforcement has been providing handouts to business owners regarding compliance for the flags, especially around the square and a block in each direction. We run into the open flags, and the open flags in particular, there are a few vendors who had them like mobile flag poles in the right of way. That was problematic because that results in the sign being considered a razor sign, which is not permitted. But the ones that we had quite a number of them that were being flown by businesses. With the with enforcement, it's not unusual to have complaint. I mean, receiving a notice of violation is never fun, but it is something where we wanted to make sure you were aware that there was concern being brought to not only the code enforcement officer, but other employees and other staff members that there was fear from the, not necessarily fear, but there was concern from the business community that this would be an anti-business friendly activity to discourage the placement of flags as business owners see fit, which oftentimes business owners, especially those that have pedestrian fronting businesses, you have to be able to provide eyes on your product, get people in your doors. It becomes a challenge. We want to avoid a situation where it becomes a mutually armed destruction type of signage where everyone's trying to outsign the other person. So it's one of those things where there's concern. That's why I wanted to bring it to your attention tonight.
And so to confirm, what we're talking about right now is the hanging flags that are attached to a building,
Yes.
taken in at night, not necessarily left out overnight, although it could be, I suppose, if it were approved. but we're talking about the flags that are attached to the building. And it's 7 foot from the tip of the flag if the flag is hanging. It's 7 foot from the tip of the flag,
Lowest point of fabric, yes.
lowest point of fabric. So we're not talking about anything that's actually put onto the sidewalk, because
No,
that would be
we're-
something else.
No, exactly. We're only
Those
talking
vertical
about,
flags that are sometimes weighted and put onto the sidewalk.
Yes, the ones on portable bases, on portable poles are not permitted. So that's a different problem. The ones that are attached to buildings on poles that may be 4 to 5 feet in height, that's the issue. And we had quite a few of them around the borough that the business owners, they had some concerns, and they let them be known. So
Well, I feel like we raised the height with good cause. First of all, compliance with the state, and secondly, anecdotally, we had been made aware of people, including myself, who have been cut by low-hanging flags in high winds. Leave it where it is, drop it 4 inches. What do people think?
It's right now at 7.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with it there.
Okay.
7's fine.
Let's leave it where it is, I'm guessing, for now, and then we can always address it if we need to. All right. Did you have anything else that we needed from us?
not for this item.
All right. Unless anybody has any follow-up questions or comments, we'll move on to the next item. Also, Mr. Whitmore, code enforcement ticketing.
So this was one that we've been working on for some time now. The ticketing ordinance scheme, the ordinance itself was placed into the electronic folder. It hasn't substantially changed. We have identified 29 specific specific violations related to quality of life that we would like to see ticketing address those issues. The whole point of the ticketing ordinance is to provide a primary means of getting a property owner's attention to ensure code compliance, as opposed to utilizing solely the citation method, which has some extra costs and it creates a program that's not necessarily going to address those issues that are temporary in nature, like unplowed or unshoveled sidewalks and the like, but then also just getting compliance through a judgment, it takes time. With the provisions we've provided, a gamut of quality of life issues are addressed. The method by which the enforcement action would occur is that a code enforcement officer sees the problem. They will provide a warning to the individual property owner or the individual engaged in the activity. Upon receiving a warning, if it is not corrected in 2 days, 48 hours, the code officer may begin the ticketing process. The ticket itself, the first one is $25. It can then go to a second ticket, which is $50, then to a third ticket, at which time then we have the ability to go for a citation from that. Additionally, if the ticket is not paid within, I believe it's 21 days, then at that time we can also go for citation for failure to pay the ticket. This isn't a method to collect money. It's really just to make sure we are getting our nuisances in a better state. The notice of violation itself is a good tool. Having a warning with the ticket will be a great tool. We are hopeful that we won't have to utilize the provisions for the citation or the escalating fines as a primary means to get compliance, but there will be an expectation that there will be some unhappy people. So if you do proceed with this, you may experience phone calls from individuals who are irate for issues that in some communities would be second nature, but something that property maintenance code is very clear when it comes to these violations. Some of them are not necessarily the end of the world. Having a junked vehicle on your property isn't going to be the end of the world, but at the same time, it clearly degrades the value of other people's property. So this is one means by which to correct that problem, and many others. We're hopeful that this will be a method that we will have success with making sure that sidewalks are cleared during snow events, and that other weather event related damages and things like that. There's a way to get proactive, not necessarily proactive, but quickly get to a point where where there's compliance. So if it's okay, there's a lot of material in the folder. I wasn't sure if you all have had a chance to read it, but we can proceed with this as would be beneficial. The PBS on this one has PBS, CPSB, PBS. Yeah. So yeah, the PBS on this includes the director's cut. The quick cut of it, showing the directly quality of life issues and those escalating fines. But we can get directly into the ordinance at a meeting if you'd like, or we can proceed for the March 10th.
All right. I trust you've all had a chance to review these materials. The PBS does give a pretty good overview. We've talked about this a little bit in the previous calendar year, and we did set this as one of our legislative priorities for 2025. I can't stress enough how this is not an attempt to collect revenue from citations and tickets. Really, this is a program that would give us, simultaneously the ability to educate individual tenants or property owners about infractions while still actually having some sort of enforcement ability. Some folks are not motivated by being repeatedly asked to shovel snow, but they might be motivated by escalating citations. In previous conversations with code enforcement, the primary things that we interact with the residents over are high grass and unshoveled walks. Obviously, there are other things too, but if you just go through those reports, that's like 95% of it is, somebody didn't mow or somebody didn't shovel. And often, I think with rental properties, a tenant may not know, depending on their lease, if shoveling is their responsibility or the landlord's responsibility. But my guess is if they find a citation on the door, they're going to find out really fast whether it's their responsibility or the landlord's. And hopefully we can get to a point where our code enforcement, first of all, continues to be congenial and helpful and didactic, and doesn't become punitive. But this does give us the ability to flex where we have to. So anybody have any thoughts? Do you feel like this is going in the right direction? Is there anything you'd like to see different?
What is the process that we do currently?
Excuse me. So what happens is Pete will go out if we have a complaint or during a RRUO compliance inspection. With that, or in instances where it's an exterior-based complaint and we're able just to observe it from the public right-of-way, in those instances, we will provide a notice of violation that will generally be affixed to the property. We will contact the property owner and we will document that. After such time, the problem we run into is we have to give the individual an opportunity to actually fix the problem. So that could be a couple of days, it could be a week, it just depends on each scenario. but providing I keep saying applicant, providing the individual property owner or resident with the information and direct timelines of when action is expected. If that does not occur, at which time then we begin the process with a non-traffic citation, and then it goes to court. And things can get generally what we're finding. We're getting the fines, so that's a good thing. But at the same time, process can take a month or two. So it really does drag things out, and all the judge cares about is compliance. So if it's something like unshoveled walkways, well, it's April now, so it's not something where, to a certain extent, we don't want to be in a position where we're wasting the court's time.
One, I think, at least for me, I think it's too expensive, the fines. If we're not using it as a mechanism to, make money, which I don't think we should, I think that should be significantly lower. And I mean, what about, the case of someone who just physically can't get out and mow their lawn? We provide resources for them or anything like that to help people who just, physically can't do these things?
What we tried to do in those instances, we had a few this past winter with shoveling. If there's an opportunity to connect an individual with someone that someone that can shovel, or someone that's already going around shoveling, the code enforcement officer will do that. Generally, though, when it comes to most of these problems, we're not having an issue where it's someone that's infirmed. It's generally just someone that doesn't have an expectation of doing the work. If we do run into a situation where someone cannot actually maintain the property, that's what we would get to if that were to happen, we would get into a situation where we're probably going to be making additional calls for other social services, but we do try to at least link individuals up with local businesses that can be able to provide services like mowing, like shoveling. The problem we also run into is that those people end up charging money, so that's often a real impediment as well. At the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the property owner. We aren't going out of our way to have citations put against people, so it's the way the systems works is to compliance basis. So we try to be helpful in that regard.
Other thoughts?
I have a question on the first violation warning, which is $0 fine. Is that a printed violation ticket?
Yes. So actually, it's the same system as parking enforcement.
Okay.
It can print out the notice, the violation, just like a parking ticket.
Is there an opportunity here, as a lot of these things have just occurred over and over and over and over again, and we haven't. I think our code enforcement does a great job, but a lot of times we as a borough haven't done it. And so now I think there's a lot of old and bad habits, or people that just don't really realize, as has been mentioned already, tenants that don't realize that, yes, that's probably, depending upon their lease, their responsibility. Or perhaps even the property owner itself that may have a building of tenants. The property owner itself doesn't actually live here, and the property owner itself might not also might not know that is their responsibility, such as grass and snow. Since we're trying to educate both or all of the above, is it possible that these on the warning, these are listed on the warning of in 7 days you will be fined $25, in 2 days you will be fined, after that violation, listing it out?
That's something we could do.
And sorry to interrupt. And then furthermore, because I think sometimes it's just put on the door or mailed to the property. We don't always know that property owner is receiving that. I feel like since we're trying to educate everybody on it, we should figure out who is the property owner, what address do we have on file for them at the borough, send it to them as well, so that they're fixing it in their lease. If they want their tenant to be responsible for it, they need to put it in the lease. Otherwise, they need to get here and do it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's code enforcement and then there's code enforcement, and for a really, really long time, we used an outside agency that really only was concerned with the Universal Construction Code, and while we asked them to do other things, you know, to enforce other parts of the ordinance, that really wasn't their interest, nor did they necessarily have the manpower for it. And so council, a few years ago, created our own internal code enforcement position at the advice of John's predecessor. We now have the ability to start what we should have been doing all along, which is enforcing our own ordinance. The ability to do that, to have conversations with our neighbors about, hey, just so you know, this is what's expected of a property owner or tenant, and to educate people to correct a situation is a luxury, and we can take advantage of it. But sometimes we do need to be able to show folks that there is a consequence for continuing to ignore the rules that have been established for the common good. Does anybody have a question here for John? Or, I mean, do you feel like this is something we can just dive into once an ordinance has been drafted in a public meeting, or do you want to workshop this some more?
I think considering we're missing 2 of our members, I'd like to workshop this some more, especially when it comes, and I kind of agree with Peter, when it comes to the cost of the fines, as well as the minimum number of days between each violation, because it seems like after the first violation, if someone's not paying attention, you have about 2 weeks before you're up to $1,000, and I think that is astronomical, but that's just my opinion. But I could see how there could be so many delays in the process of ameliorating the first ticketed event that could cause it would cause concern for me if I were a renter, which I was.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a point to be made that high grass is one thing, but ice is a different thing, right?
So it would depend, I guess.
And is that $1,000 fine if you refuse to shovel your sidewalk more than what your homeowner's insurance will pay if somebody has a slip and fall? That $1,000 might actually be cheap compared to somebody with a broken spine or something to that effect. I mean, ultimately, the goal here is compliance, not you know. The longer we give people to clear ice, the longer the ice sits there.
Right. I was looking at more of the animal welfare concerns and taking care of, you know, if you have a lot of animals and they're disturbing, like how long is it going to take you to, you know, quiet animals down, and what do you do? Like, what are solutions too? I think as we go through and create an ordinance that in which we're trying to help people follow the law and be good neighbors, I think we also have to help them understand what that looks like, and you know, yeah. So anyway, I definitely think we should workshop it. I think other members would have some.
Yeah, I think that's a wise course. So we will continue to workshop this over the next few months, particularly when our other members return. All right. New business tonight, competitive marketing for conferences. Becca and Charles.
Yeah, I'll kick this off, and then I'll turn it over to Parking Manager Fissel for some more nuanced information on it. First, let me preface this. This is what I would put in a bucket of good problems. And this actually came to us midweek last week. So that's why we've not heard of this PBS before. It was literally just created last week in preparation for tonight's meeting. The issue, and some of you have mentioned this earlier in our various meetings tonight, many of you work in or know people that work in the hospitality industry. which is obviously our lifeblood here in Gettysburg. Why I say this is a good problem, the slow months of the year, January and February, sometimes I refer to that as the nuclear economic winter of Gettysburg, where everything is just really slow. And this is one of the reasons Main Street Gettysburg created the Christmas Festival, was to try to get the tourist dollars into our market later into our seasons. The Gettysburg Hotel recently successfully got a conference. The Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission conference came to Gettysburg this year, where they had previously, I believe it was Lancaster, was their previous preferred location for their conference. They have this conference in the winter months annually. The hotel here in town successfully got that business, not just for themselves, but for the entire community. The issue that came to us is that those of us that work in this industry understand the competitive nature of conferences. And so there are various amenities / concessions that people that organize conferences are looking for to make decisions on where to bring their conference to. So with that, I'll turn it over to Becca to explain how this relates to a full parking garage in January, which did occur over several days in the middle of the week in January of this year, which has never happened before. That's why I say this is a bucket of good problems. So Becca, do you want to talk about some of that, please?
Good evening. Yes, as Charles said, I don't know how many people are in the garage often, but in my 10 years full-time here, I've never seen that garage full during the week, especially in January or February. And Wednesday and Thursday in particular of that week, it was almost no parking spaces available. Monday and Tuesday, there were some overnights, and there was a little more availability Monday and Tuesday, but Wednesday and Thursday were the busiest. And it was all the way full to level 7. So the need was definitely there, and they were here. They were visiting everywhere. They were eating here. They were staying here, and for those 4 days. I forget what else you asked, Charles.
No, that's fine. That's so the specific request. The hotel has not yet secured a second year of this conference, and they are wanting to know, based on the overwhelming usage, is there any appetite to entertain, for lack of a better way of putting it, a group rate for large conferences to come to Gettysburg and do business here. One of the concessions that conferees would look for is parking free, and we all know that they could go to the Wyndham where parking is free. I would argue that there is a monetary value to being in Gettysburg. I don't know what that monetary value is, but it is a heightened experience than you would have out, dare I say, in Strabane Township at a surface parking lot at a conference center. You're not going to have the same quality experience that you have in the core. So I would not advocate for free, but I would maybe suggest there's appetite for some conversation on a group rate discount. We've done some of the math on that. Right now, our daily rate is $18 per night, per vehicle, per your fee resolution. The average stay in January and February of last year would come to about a 9-hour stay, which would be about $9, because we're still at the $1 an hour rate. So essentially, for just if there's an appetite to have a conversation about this type of concept, that would be our starting point to entertain as 50%. Now, if you're going to have that conversation, I'd just caution, like, people would like, well, how much is the borough losing? Well, frankly, we're not losing anything because this is new money, no matter how much money it is. Whether it's $1 or $18, it's money that never existed in January before.
In this particular instance, how many days was the conference and how many attendees were there?
It was the 4 days. There, like I said, Wednesday and Thursday, there was about 300 attendees. Monday and Tuesday, there were about 150.
And we wrote the PBS to essentially respect the meter bag ordinance, where B&Bs or hotels would have to have a minimum number of rooms, for example, to be able to get a group rate discount, if you will. How would you like to proceed with the conversation?
So to clarify, this that you're talking about is just for the garage, not necessarily street meters.
That's correct.
Thank you. I mean, I'm all for filling that garage, and yeah, it's rarely ever full. Certainly in January, certainly during the week. I think there's some value there to discuss for sure. It's almost, as we say in theater, butts and seats are butts and seats. Whether it was a comp or a buy one, get one, or a $2 off, Pennsylvanians love a deal, But it gets butts and seats, and they may return. And while they're here, seeing a show or whatever, they're visiting our shops. They're going out and eating. So I'm all for conferences coming to Gettysburg, to Lincoln Square for sure.
To take that analogy one step further, the way the staff wrote this PBS is heads in beds. Yeah.
Well, that's a different approach. Yeah, I mean, new business is good, right? I mean, anything we can do to attract more people to Gettysburg in our off months, that's a win. I think if we could structure this in such a way that it is seasonal, that it is limited to weekdays as opposed to weekends, and that it does have minimum levels to be taken advantage of. I mean, the goal is not to create, less expensive parking. The goal is to bring in several hundred conference attendees or several hundred vendors for a trade show or something to that effect. So, anybody else? I mean, I think it's a reasonable request on the part of one of our largest and longest term partners in the hospitality industry, right? I mean, the hotel has been a presence on that square for like 1,000 years or something.
Yeah, I support the discount idea. I mean, they're going to stay at the hotel, they're going to go out to eat, they're going to go to our shops, you're talking, a few hundred people, so I think it's a good idea.
Would it be, as you envision it, would it be contingent upon the hotel to determine who gets, like a placard? How do we administer this discount?
Yeah, Becca, do you want to explain how we manage that currently?
Sure. So the hotel in particular has a lot of conferences throughout the year. So what they do is they call me, they email me, they say this is the group that's coming, these are the dates, the times, and I set up a permit. They apply for the permit, which is listed as free on the website. They have to have a key code to type in for their permit use. And then at the end of when that time is over, when their conference is over, then I invoice the hotel the number of days each guest stayed, which is on the permitted ask how many days they stayed. So I invoice the hotel $18 a day per person per day. So it would be the same. It wouldn't change that we have their license plates in the system, in the permitting system that pops up.
I would like to, see more on it as far as what you'd be proposing as far as would this, what are the parameters around it as far as, is it a certain number? Is it 100, is it 200, or is it also it has to be a certain number of days for this to be able to be kicked in? And then also, I don't think we could just do it for one business. We would have to, it'd have to be for everyone.
Right.
If they have, and maybe you can't say conference, is it just an event? Or how do you,
We'd like to tie it to, so we had envisioned this, so like if some of our B&Bs that have not as many beds have those conferees staying at those establishments, they would apply. They could have the same group rate. But it would be incumbent upon those various businesses, and not just the hotel, to communicate that, there's some overflow, say at one of our B&Bs in town that, because I think the hotel is like 180 rooms. There's 300 people at this conference. So if the conferees are during the day at the conference, as long as they're having a stay overnight somewhere in town, I would suggest we allow that they would apply for the discount as well.
and then also, we know how much parking is, parking issues are loved in Gettysburg, and so just, that you will probably have people who say, regardless of the volume, somebody's guests are being given a preferential rate compared to mine. Sure. But I'm all about volume. Volume, solves all problems. So I'd like to see more.
Yeah, I think there's wisdom in tying it to the type of event, like a conference, right? Like, if for instance, the hotel in Gettysburg can bring in 300 people, but the Majestic can bring in 800 people for the day, like, that doesn't mean that the Majestic customers should get the discounted rate. The 180 hotel stays or 300 hotel stays for one night or 2 nights or 3 nights, they're generating pillow tax, which help with police funding. They're generating, business for restaurants. They're going to shops. There's a ripple effect that moves outward when a conference is in town for multiple days, and it's in all of our interests to promote that if we can. So I think creating a specific usage that triggers the ability to take advantage of this permit, as well as a threshold that has to be met, right? 8 rooms is not a conference. That might be a family reunion. 180 rooms, 300 rooms, that's a conference. And if that's, 3 or 4 nights, we're talking about weekdays, off season, and that's money our community desperately needs, whether it's restaurants, hotels, boutiques, shops.
Yeah, to piggyback that, I have a question for Charles. Would this involve a marketing plan with like Destination Gettysburg and Garma and some of those other merchants in town who would want to know what's going on? If I were a merchant, I probably wouldn't, I didn't even know there was a conference downtown, and I live near town, right? So I was thinking it would be great if the merchants knew they can kind of plan ahead, and I could see this really benefiting. Yeah.
Have not entertained this with Carl Peterzak yet, but there's logic to that question. Well, if this is a policy council would like to take on and adopt, then we've created an opportunity to bring bigger business here, especially in our slower months. This is what Destination Gettysburg is supposed to be doing.
Well, I'm not hearing a lot of resistance here. Any opportunity we have to create new business, particularly in our deader months, seems like a win.
Yeah, right now we wrote the PBS specific to the months of January, February, and maybe that's where we start. and then see the success over the next year or so and go from there.
Cool.
Right.
Any last minute comments, questions on this idea? All right, keep running with it, and we'll talk about it again when next you're ready to. That takes us to the end of our new business for the night. It takes us back to the second public comment section for this meeting. This section is not restricted to items appearing on the agenda. You can talk about any subject you wish, but we do ask that you limit yourself to 5 minutes. Please use the podium. We need you to state your name and your address of residence. Is there any public comment?
Hey guys, how you doing tonight?
Great.
It's a Monday night. It sure is late, isn't it? Tell you what, I want to thank you for a couple things.
Could you start with your name and address,
Sure.
please?
My name and address. Is that what you said? Okay. My name is Doug Stevens. I live at 2087 Biglerville Road, Gettysburg, PA.
Thank you.
And I have a businesses right here in town. Can you stand up real quick? I want to first thank you that you did not lower the flag. We appreciate yeah, it's like here. so yeah, so thank you very much for keeping that up, because when we're busy talking and walking, sometimes you get hit in the head. And something you were just talking about now was parking. I've asked a few times, because like I said, I have some businesses in town, is there a way that we can validate people's parking? Because they do it in all the big cities. Why can't we do it here in Gettysburg? Draw them to come and utilize the garage. Because I know I might have the best business in the world, but without other businesses around that complement, like you said, going out to eat or having being able to stay overnight, it doesn't matter how good of a job I do. I need all the rest of that. And maybe by having a way that we can validate the parking, can encourage them to go ahead and spend more time, and rather than just, oh, I got to watch a meter, I got to watch a meter, let me get out of here. I know we all do that when we put the quarters in, don't we? We're focused more on the quarters than we are on what we're here for. So that's an idea. But I want to get back to why I'm really here. I'm met with frustration. One of my businesses I have is Victorian Carriage Company. And back in the middle of summer, I heard that they might be doing something with the permits and with parking. So July 16th, I tried to contact the borough. I was able to contact the planning manager. Planning manager said, talk to the parking manager. Parking manager said, talk to the planning manager. Then the planning manager said, talk to the borough manager. The borough manager said, talk to the parking manager. I kind of went in a circle. So with that, I wrote an email, sent an email to the borough manager explaining I have thoughts and concerns a lot about the ordinances. I think it's chapter 13 and 9 about the carriages and how it works. And I hear that you might be working on stuff. I'd like to be involved and give you professional advice from someone that's been doing this for a decade. I'm sorry to say, I got no response. So I waited about 2.5 weeks. Then I sent an email letter to Mr. Moon explaining the same thing, that, hey, I'm here, I'm a professional, I've been doing this for 10 years, I hear something going, can I please be involved? I'm sorry to say, Mr. Moon, I got no response. Which leads to my frustration, because now we're getting, we're like we said, we're nuclear, how cold, not how cold it is, but how busy we are in town. It's the desert here. And that's how we are with our seasonal businesses all. We're in February, and March is the lowest time. All the money that you saved up is getting spent. We don't have much money, and everything's been budgeted. Well, we're getting ready to start doing our permits again in April. So we call up the borough and say, hey, when are permits coming out? Getting ready for it. Oh, well, we're going to get to it in April. I'm like, okay, we're getting ready, because there's things we have to do, which I'd like to address too, but I only have 5 minutes. But so then come to find out that apparently the borough, you guys, the council, had meetings about the carriages and parking and all this and all that, and you decided to raise the rates. No one told me this. Like I said, until I called today, I'm a month out from starting. I've already set my rates. I'm already set my rates for employees I'm hiring. I already told them how much I'm going to be able to pay them that we're hiring for the season. Now I'm finding out that we're going from a few $100s a year to over $1,000. Wow, that's per carriage. And I'm trying to draw up a business and bring more people in town. So now it's thousands of dollars to have a carriage out here. I think that's not helping the business. Carriages bring business to town. If you ever see pictures like around Christmas time of any town, just about, especially here at Gettysburg, you'll see the carriage going past with the beautiful Christmas tree in the center of town. In fact, York County is still using images and video of us when we did business over there. We know carriages bring business. Not only do we employ your neighbors or your neighbors' kids to work with us, but it's bringing more stuff to the local shops here in town. And I have to say, I'm met with frustration. I tried 6, 8 months ago. Got no answers. And then the only thing I have now, it's time to apply. Oh, here's a couple. Now you got to pay thousands of dollars instead of a few hundred. I don't think that's right. It's not fair, especially, I don't have the money right now because it's all been budgeted. And like I said, we got less than a month to figure it out. And honestly, the borough ordinances that you have for carriages is outdated, it's antiquated. I believe it was done up in 1993. It doesn't look out for the best interests of the animals. It really doesn't. And I believe where you've designated for the carriages to park, I think is bad. I think it's a bad idea, and I've mentioned that to the borough before. What's the business areas in town? You have the square here, and right there in front of Mr. G's, with people turning out of Lefevre and trying to go up, South Street and crossing, you got the blinking lights there. How much busier can you get? But yet that's where we're designated to unload and offload people. I think that's stupid. It's dangerous. And besides, they were saying that the increase in the fees is to cover the cost of the revenue you lose from the parking meters. Well, in my letters I've sent to you folks, to the leadership here, I've suggested that we use Wade Avenue. It's not high volume parking meters up there. I think there's 6 spots. Most often than not, you might see 1 or 2 cars there when you always see the meters down there on Baltimore full. It's one way. It's not busy with traffic. It's safer. And if you have our guests coming up to that area of Baltimore Street, it's bringing the people up. I mean, what's there, 2 or 3 new businesses there with the ice cream and the settler shop? It's bringing them right to their doorstep.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. We're past your 5 minutes. Do you have a card with you?
No.
All right. Can I get your number?
Sure.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to put it on for everybody to call it out.
Come on over here.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess you're getting the gist I'm trying to say.
I am. Come in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you put your name and number on there for me?
Sure. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Is there any other public comment? I apologize for not answering your
That was all this.
Here, you wanna stand here
that
so
to
you
you.
can see your face?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bolt. I am a student at Vida Charter School. Please protect my friends from ice. Say no to ice. Hola, me llamo Bolt. Soy estudiante de la Escuela Vida. Por favor, protejan mis amigos del ice. Digan no al ice.
That's Bolt, a resident of 126 East Middle Street. I'm Lauren Jean Griffune of the same address. And here's my notes. I'm also here to ask that the Borough Council upholds the Gettysburg Police Department Policy Manual 414.4 on detentions, page 275, that officers must not detain individuals subject to administrative warrants or similar requests for detention based solely on the basis of a misdemeanor offense or civil immigration violation. I know at the last council meeting there was discussions about ICE, and I've talked to a couple of you about that. It is my hope that if there's a policy that you're looking at, anything you can do to prevent families from being separated, especially for non-criminal issues. If a person has already been arrested for one of these egregious crimes that were mentioned of rape or murder, they're going to be in jail and ICE will be notified. There's no need for Gettysburg to be involved. So it's just my request that if there is, it sounded like there was a policy you were looking at the county level or something like this. I would really like for ICE to not be like going out of our way to involve them in our community. My children go to a dual language charter school, and there's issues where children are being threatened by other children on the bus that ICE is going to come and not just deport their family, but kill them. And people are afraid. So little children are afraid, and so I would like to make sure we can do everything we can to keep families together. Another child did ask a teacher if they would adopt them if their family was deported. So I would like Gettysburg to continue to be the safe, wonderful, warm, welcoming place that it feels to me. And I also did, I was trying to find out on the ABC's page, there's something up there about the Civil Service Commission. Is that active or not? Like nobody could tell me, is that real? It's still active? Okay. Because their last notes were from 2008. So, okay. Just on the page, on the web page. Okay. That was my question. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment tonight?
Good evening, Dave Petters, 13 Lincoln Square, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I was really excited to hear the conversation about the marketing for conferences. I think that's a great idea, but let's think about taking it one step further. I don't know if the borough has ever tried to discount their parking for January and February. It is a horrible time of the year for everybody, but instead of creating these little markets, why not do it for everyone in the parking garage for those months? Why not try to get the bedroom community that surrounds Gettysburg come in and shop in town and get the different organizations, Garma, Gettysburg, Destination, everybody working together to get those people into town. And, you know, you talked about whether it's butts in the seats or heads on the beds. If we get a lot of people utilizing the parking garage, that will help offset whatever discount you do for those two things. So think about expanding your scope. But absolutely, conferences are great for everyone. Thank you. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, sir. Any further public comment? Last chance? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we